When we first drove through the gates of Oakwood Hills Estates, I felt like we had finally found it, the place where our family could heal, grow, and build the life we had always imagined. The neighborhood stood like something from a magazine spread. Immaculate sidewalks lined with perfectly spaced oak trees, expansive front lawns that seemed to compete for the greenest grass award, and houses that looked both luxurious and inviting. After 3 years of hospital rooms, rehabilitation centers, and temporary apartments near medical facilities, this felt like coming home. My husband James and I had spent those years focused entirely on our daughter Lily. At 14, she had been an athlete swimming, soccer, track, until the accident that took her left leg below the knee. The doctors, the surgeries, the physical therapy, the prosthetic fittings, they consumed our lives, our savings, and our energy. But Lily, with a resilience that still takes my breath away, never once allowed herself to be defined by what she had lost. We moved in during early spring, when the dogwoods were blooming and the community pool was being readied for the summer season. The first neighbors we met brought welcome baskets and genuine smiles. The Johnson family across the street had a daughter close to Lily's age. The elderly couple next door offered gardening advice and fresh vegetables from their backyard plot. For the first time in years, I felt tension leaving my shoulders. "Do you think I can join the swim team here?" Lily asked on our third day, her eyes bright with an enthusiasm I had missed seeing. Her custom prosthetic, a $25,000 medical marvel covered partially by insurance after months of fighting, allowed her to walk almost normally. But it was in the water where Lily truly felt free, where the absence of her leg did not matter. "Of course you can, sweetheart," I assured her, making a mental note to check the community bulletin board for sign-up information. "This place has everything we could want." That evening, a neatly dressed woman with a clipboard knocked on our door. She introduced herself as Patricia Winters, president of the Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association. Her smile seemed practiced as she handed us a 3-ring binder filled with community regulations. "We are very particular about maintaining standards here," she explained, her eyes scanning our moving boxes with mild disapproval. "These guidelines ensure property values remain high and our community remains desirable. The monthly HOA fees cover landscaping of common areas, pool maintenance, and enforcement of our regulations." James flipped through the binder, his expression neutral. As an attorney who specialized in civil rights cases, particularly those involving disability discrimination, he had developed a professional poker face that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Thank you for this," he said cordially. "We are looking forward to being part of such a well-maintained community." Patricia smiled, but her eyes lingered momentarily on Lily, who had come to stand beside her father. "Yes, well, we expect all residents to contribute to the aesthetic and harmony of Oakwood Hills." She departed with a promise to see us at the next HOA meeting. That night, as we unpacked kitchen boxes, I remember telling James how relieved I felt to have found a safe, clean neighborhood where Lily could thrive during her crucial high school years. The HOA rules seemed reasonable enough: restrictions on exterior paint colors, guidelines for lawn care, regulations about trash can placement, and holiday decorations. "Just be careful," James cautioned, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Sometimes the most picture-perfect places hide the ugliest prejudices. Rules can be weapons in the wrong hands." I dismissed his concerns as professional paranoia. After all, we had researched this neighborhood thoroughly. The schools were excellent, the crime rate was low, and the community amenities were outstanding. The higher HOA fees seemed a small price to pay for such perfection. As I watched Lily through the kitchen window, testing her prosthetic on the even ground of our new backyard, her face lifted toward the sun, I was certain we had made the right choice. How could I have known that the pristine facade of Oakwood Hills concealed a rigid system of control and exclusion? How could I have guessed that our dream home would soon become the front line in a battle we never wanted to fight? The manicured perfection that had drawn us in would soon reveal its thorns, and my daughter would be the first to bleed. The first monthly HOA meeting should have been our warning. The community center gleamed with polished floors and tasteful artwork, filled with about 50 residents seated in neat rows. Patricia Winters commanded the space from a small raised platform, flanked by 4 other board members who nodded at appropriate intervals as she spoke. Her presentation style was effy and authoritative, brooking no interruptions as she detailed upcoming landscaping projects and community events. And now, a reminder about our standards, Patricia continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. We have noticed several violations that require immediate attention. The Hendersons on Maple Court have installed unapproved window treatments. The Rodriguez family has been parking their work truck in their driveway overnight, and several homes have failed the lawn moisture content inspection. I glanced at James, who raised an eyebrow slightly. Lawn moisture content, the level of scrutiny seemed excessive, but the other residents appeared accustomed to it. When the meeting opened for questions, a middle-aged man raised his hand. I submitted a request to install a ramp beside my front steps for my mother who visits using a wheelchair. It has been 3 months with no response, he said. Patricia smiled thinly. Aesthetic modifications require careful consideration, Mr. Garcia. Your request is still under review to ensure compliance with our architectural standards. Perhaps your mother could use the rear entrance in the meantime. The man sat down, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. James made a note in his small pocket notebook, something he did habitually when his professional interest was piqued. Our first violation notice arrived exactly 2 weeks after we moved in. A cream-colored envelope with the HOA logo contained a form letter informing us that our mailbox stood 3 inches lower than regulation height. We had 7 days to correct the violation or face a $50 fine, followed by $10 daily penalties. This is ridiculous, I muttered as James took measurements with a level and tape measure. The mailbox came with the house. Document everything, he advised calmly. Take photos, save the notice, record dates. Compliance is easier than fighting, but evidence matters. The following week, while James was at work, 2 board members conducted what they called a routine exterior inspection of our property. They took notes about our lawn mowing pattern and informed me that our garbage cans should be moved 6 inches further from the curb. I complied, telling myself this was simply the price of living in such a pristine neighborhood. But then came the pool incident, the first one before the damage. Lily had been swimming 3 times a week, usually in the morning when the pool was less crowded. Swimming had been a crucial part of her physical therapy, and now it was her joy, her freedom. In the water, she moved without the slightest hint of disability. I was grocery shopping when she called me, her voice small and tight in a way I had not heard since the early days after her accident. "Mom, can you come get me? I do not want to be here anymore." I found her sitting alone on a bench outside the pool area, her prosthetic already attached, her wet hair dripping onto her shoulders. "What happened, sweetie?" I asked, sitting beside her. Mrs. Winters came over while I was swimming. She said several residents had expressed concern about hygiene issues with my prosthetic being near the pool, Lily explained, her eyes fixed on the ground. She said I should consider swimming during non-peak hours. She used the word consideration about 5 times, but she was basically saying I make people uncomfortable. My cheeks burned with anger and shame. Shame that I had not been there to protect her. Anger that anyone would make my child feel unwelcome. "Did she specifically say you could not swim?" I asked carefully. "No, she just kept talking about community comfort and how special accommodations require advance approval from the board." Lily looked up at me then, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I have been swimming my whole life, Mom. Since when am I a special accommodation?" That evening, we discussed the incident as a family. Lily, having recovered her composure, was adamant that she would not be driven away from the pool. "This is exactly the kind of subtle discrimination that often flies under the radar," James said, his professional demeanor slipping to reveal his anger. "They are not stupid enough to explicitly ban her, but they create an uncomfortable environment that achieves the same result." "Should we complain officially?" I asked. James shook his head. "Not yet. Let us document patterns first. If this is an isolated incident with one prejudiced board member, that is one thing. If it is systematic, that is another matter entirely." Over the next few weeks, I began noticing things I had overlooked before. the lack of any visibly disabled residents in a community of over 200 homes, the absence of basic accessibility features in common areas, the way certain residents, mostly elderly or those with visible differences, seem to keep to themselves, rarely using community facilities. At the playground, I struck up a conversation with another mother, carefully mentioning the pool incident in vague terms. Her response was illuminating. "Oh, the board is notorious for that kind of thing," she whispered, glancing around as if concerned about being overheard. "The Thompsons wanted to install a small wheelchair ramp to their front door last year. Their son has muscular dystrophy, and the HOA blocked it for 6 months, claiming architectural integrity concerns. They ended up moving." By the time I returned home, I had heard 3 similar stories. I shared them with James, who added the details to his growing file labeled simply Oakwood documentation. "Keep your ears open," he advised, "but do not confront anyone directly yet. Let Lily continue swimming as she normally would. If they want to fight, they will have to make the first explicit move." We did not have to wait long. The following week, a formal notice arrived regarding pool area protocols. Among various reasonable rules about shower requirements and no running was a new item. All medical devices must be approved by the board before being brought into the pool area. James read the notice twice, his expression darkening. They are targeting her without naming her, classic move to create plausible deniability. "What should we do?" I asked. "For now, Lily continues swimming. They have not explicitly banned prosthetics, just created a vague approval requirement. If challenged, we will request the approval process details in writing." He placed the notice in his file. "They are testing boundaries. Let us see how far they are willing to go." None of us realized then just how far that would be. The comfortable neighborhood was revealing itself day by day as something far more sinister, a community built on exclusion masquerading as excellence, where difference was treated as defect. The warning signs were flashing red, but the true crisis was still to come. July arrived with a brutal heat wave that sent temperatures soaring into the high 90s. The community pool became the center of neighborhood life, with families seeking relief from the stifling air. Lily, now comfortable with her routine, had continued swimming despite the occasional disapproving glance or whispered comment. She had even made a few friends, other teenagers who saw her athletic ability rather than her prosthetic. "I will be back by lunch," Lily told me that Thursday morning, her swim bag slung over her shoulder, towel draped around her neck. "Maddie and Taylor are meeting me there." I watched her walk down the sidewalk, her gait almost imperceptible to those who did not know what to look for. Pride swelled in my chest. Despite everything, she refused to shrink herself or hide away. I turned back to my home office, where a deadline waited for my attention, never suspecting that this ordinary summer day would change everything. The call came at 11:27 a.m. I remember checking the clock as my phone rang, thinking it was too early for Lily to be heading home. "Mom," her voice was strained, barely controlled. "I need you to come get me, now." "What happened? Are you hurt?" Panic surged through me. "They took it, Mom, they took my leg." Her voice broke, and they broke it. I arrived at the pool in under 4 minutes, tires screeching as I pulled into the parking lot. Lily sat alone on a bench near the entrance, a towel wrapped around her shoulders despite the heat. Her face was blotchy from crying, but her expression had hardened into something I had never seen before, a mixture of humiliation and rage. Patricia Winters stood nearby with 2 male board members I recognized from meetings. One held Lily's prosthetic leg, examining it with unwarranted familiarity that made my skin crawl. As I approached, I could see immediately that something was wrong with the alignment of the joints. "What is going on here?" I demanded, moving immediately to Lily's side. Patricia stepped forward, her expression professionally concerned, but eyes cold. "Mrs. Mitchell, we have been trying to reach you. There was an unfortunate incident regarding your daughter's medical device." "My name," Lily interrupted, her voice shaking but determined, "is Lily. And that is not a medical device, it is my prosthetic leg, my property, that you took from me without permission." Patricia continued as if Lily had not spoken. As you know, our pool regulations clearly state that all medical devices must be approved before being brought into the pool area. When we noticed your daughter had once again brought her prosthetic without approval, we attempted to explain the rules. You never told me how to get approval, Lily countered, her confidence growing. I have been swimming here all summer. The taller board member, I later learned his name was Richard Hartman, stepped forward with the prosthetic still in his hands. When your daughter became confrontational, we determined it was best to secure the device for safekeeping while we see. Contacted you. Confrontational, I looked at Lily, who shook her head in disbelief. I said no when they told me to leave, she explained. That is all. I said I had as much right to be here as anyone else. Then Mrs. Winters said my prosthetic presented a hygiene risk and needed to be properly stored away from the water. When I refused to hand it over, Mr. Hartman here said he was authorized to secure rule violations and took it from beside my towel. I stared at the three adults in front of me, struggling to comprehend the level of cruelty and overreach. You physically took my minor daughter's prosthetic limb against her will. Do you understand what you have done? Now there is no need for dramatics, Patricia said, her voice honey-sweet but eyes hard. We are simply enforcing rules that apply to everyone. The unfortunate damage occurred when your daughter attempted to grab it back. That is a lie, Lily's voice rose. He yanked it away and twisted it. I reached for the prosthetic, which Richard reluctantly handed over. Even with my limited technical knowledge, I could see that the specialized water seal mechanisms had been compromised and the custom-fitted socket was misaligned. The damage was significant. This is a $25,000 medical device, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Custom-made for my daughter. You have not only violated her dignity and her rights, but you have damaged her property and left her immobilized. Patricia's smile faltered slightly. If there is any damage, I am sure it was pre-existing. Our board members handled it with appropriate care. Perhaps if your daughter had followed the rules in the first place. Stop talking, my voice cut through whatever justification she was about to offer. You have no idea what you have just done, no idea at all. I turned my back on them, helping Lily to the car, carrying her prosthetic as carefully as I would a wounded animal. The weight of stares from other pool-goers burned into my back, their silence in the face of what they had witnessed an indictment of the entire community. In the privacy of our car, Lily finally broke down completely, shoulders heaving with sobs that tore at my heart. They did it in front of everyone, Mom. They made me hop to a chair. They treated me like I was, contaminating their perfect pool, and now I cannot even walk properly. I held her as best I could across the center console, my own tears mixing with fury. I am so sorry, sweetheart, so sorry this happened, but I promise you this is not the end, not even close. The drive home took only minutes, but it marked the crossing of a line. Any benefit of doubt I had been giving the HOA, any excuses about overzealous rule enforcement or misunderstandings evaporated in the heat of my anger. They had targeted my child. They had physically taken a part of her. They had broken something precious and pretended it was for her own good. As I helped Lily into the house, I called James. His response was terrifyingly calm, the kind of calm that preceded storms of biblical proportions. Document everything, he instructed. Take photos of the damage. Write down exactly what happened while it is fresh. I am coming home now. I sat with Lily at the kitchen table as she recounted every detail. How Patricia had approached with the two men flanking her. How they had stood over her creating a shadow that felt deliberately intimidating. How the other swimmers had turned away when she looked to them for support. The worst part, Lily said, wiping her eyes, is that I could see some of them agreed with Mrs. Winters. Like I was the problem. Like I was making their perfect pool less perfect just by being there. I photographed the damaged prosthetic from multiple angles, noting areas where the specialized components appeared compromised. Then I held my daughter as she cried herself into exhaustion, finally falling asleep on the couch, emotionally drained. When James arrived home, his face was composed, but his eyes blazed with a cold fire I had seen only rarely, when justice had been denied to his most vulnerable clients. He examined the prosthetic carefully, then reviewed the photos and notes I had taken. They crossed every line, he said finally. Legal, ethical, moral, and they did it to the wrong family. What do we do? I asked. James looked at our sleeping daughter, her face still bearing the marks of tears, her independence at least temporarily shattered by the cruelty of people who claimed to be protecting community standards. We fight, he said simply, not just for Lily, but for everyone they have pushed aside, marginalized, or driven away in the name of their perfect neighborhood. He picked up his phone. First, we document the damage professionally. Then we begin building a case that will ensure this never happens to anyone else. As the sun set on that terrible day, our family crossed a threshold. We had come to Oakwood. Hills seeking peace and stability. Instead, we had found a battleground. But if there is one thing I had learned in the years since Lily's accident, it was that some fights choose you. And when they do, backing down is not an option. The following morning brought a clinical clarity to our situation. Dr. Melissa Chen, Lily's prosthetist, examined the damaged limb under bright examination lights, her expression growing more concerned with each component she tested. The water-resistant sealing system is completely compromised, she explained, pointing to barely visible cracks in the specialized joints. And the socket alignment has been altered by about 12 degrees. That is why Lily felt pain when she tried to wear it last night. Can it be repaired? I asked, already dreading the answer. Dr. Chen shook her head, not to the same level of functionality. The internal components that allow for smooth transitions between dry and wet environments are custom manufactured. We would essentially need to rebuild from scratch. And the cost? James asked, though we all knew the answer. The original was $25,000, with insurance covering 60% after your appeals. A replacement would be similar, though your insurance might fight harder this time since the typical replacement period is 3 to 5 years. Lily sat silently on the examination table, her temporary prosthetic, an older model she had outgrown, visible beneath her shorts. Already I could see the red marks on her residual limb where the ill-fitting socket pressed against her skin. How long for a replacement? James continued, his voice professionally detached. 8 to 12 weeks for manufacturing, assuming we can get insurance approval quickly. Otherwise, Dr. Chen let the sentence hang unfinished. 12 weeks, the remainder of summer and the start of Lily's school year. 12 weeks of discomfort, limited mobility, and constant reminder of the violation she had experienced. Dr. Chen provided detailed documentation of the damage for our insurance claim, along with her professional assessment that the damage was consistent with mishandling rather than normal wear and tear or manufacturing defect. As we left her office, the folder of documentation felt like the first piece of armor in the battle ahead. That evening, we attended the emergency HOA board meeting that had been called specifically to address what Patricia Winters referred to in her email as the pool incident. The community center meeting room was unusually full, word having spread through the neighborhood grapevine. Patricia opened the meeting with practiced concern. We are gathered to discuss an unfortunate misunderstanding that occurred yesterday at our community pool. The board wants to assure all residents that we take safety and community standards very seriously. James and I sat in the front row, Lily between us, her temporary prosthetic hidden beneath long pants despite the summer heat. I could feel the weight of stares from those around us, some sympathetic, others curiously hostile, as if we had disrupted their peaceful community by being victimized. Our pool regulations clearly state that medical devices require board approval before being brought into the pool area, Patricia continued. This rule exists to protect all residents from potential hygiene and safety issues. James raised his hand, and Patricia had no choice but to acknowledge him. Could you please cite which specific regulation addresses prosthetic limbs? He asked, his voice carrying the precise tone he used in depositions. Patricia blinked. It falls under the general category of medical devices, Mr. Mitchell. I have reviewed your regulations thoroughly, James replied, holding up his copy of the HOA handbook. There is no definition of medical devices provided, nor any specific mention of prosthetics. Furthermore, there is no outlined procedure for obtaining this supposed approval. Richard Hartman leaned forward. The board has discretionary authority to interpret regulations in the interest of community standards. Discretionary authority, James repeated thoughtfully. And did that authority include physically taking my minor daughter's prosthetic limb against her will? Did it include damaging $25,000 of medical equipment that insurance may not cover for replacement? Patricia's smile remained fixed, though her eyes hardened. As we explained to your wife yesterday, any damage was likely pre-existing. Our board members handled the situation appropriately when your daughter became confrontational. Lily straightened beside me. I was not confrontational. I simply refused to be discriminated against. A murmur ran through the room, and I noticed several residents nodding in agreement with Lily. No one was discriminating against you, dear, Patricia said dismissively. The rules apply to everyone equally. That, James said quietly, is where you are fundamentally incorrect, both morally and legally. He stood then, his tall frame commanding the room in a way Patricia's practiced authority could not match. I have remained quiet about my profession since moving here because I did not want it to define our family's place in this community. But given recent events, I believe transparency is required. He reached into his pocket and removed a business card, placing it on the table in front of the board members. My name is James Mitchell. I am a civil rights attorney specializing in cases involving disability discrimination, particularly violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act. The shift in the room was palpable. Patricia's smile froze completely, while Richard and the other board members exchanged uneasy glances. What happened to my daughter yesterday was not a misunderstanding. It was a clear violation of her rights under federal law. The actions taken by board members constituted discrimination, harassment, and resulted in significant property damage. James's voice remained measured, but it carried undeniable authority. Before this meeting, I spoke with 3 other families in this community who have experienced similar discrimination related to disabilities or medical needs. From the back of the room, an elderly man stood up, leaning heavily on a cane. They denied my request for a handrail on my front steps, told me it would disrupt the architectural aesthetic. Another resident, a woman I recognized from the playground, raised her hand. They fined us for installing a small ramp for my mother's wheelchair visits, said it was an unapproved modification. One by one, residents began sharing stories, small acts of exclusion, denied accommodations, subtle pressures to conform or leave. The pattern emerged clearly, not just to us but to everyone in the room. This was not about pool safety or property values. This was about who belonged in Oakwood Hills and who did not. Patricia attempted to regain control of the meeting. These are separate issues that can be addressed through proper channels. Regarding yesterday's incident, the board maintains that our actions were appropriate under the circumstances. Then you leave us no choice, James replied. We will be pursuing legal action, not just for our daughter, but on behalf of every resident who has been discriminated against under the guise of community standards. As we left the meeting, several residents approached us quietly, sharing contact information and their own experiences. By the time we reached our car, James had the names of 7 families with potential claims. At home, our dining room transformed into what Lily called the war room. James spread out documents, regulations, and statements across the table, creating a map of the HOA's history of discrimination. His legal colleagues began arriving, specialists in class action suits, ADA compliance experts, housing rights attorneys. Our home became the headquarters for what was quickly evolving from a personal grievance into a movement. This is bigger than us now, James explained to Lily as she watched the activity with wide eyes. Sometimes it takes one clear case of injustice to reveal a whole system of it. Lily nodded, her expression thoughtful. I keep thinking about other kids like me who might want to move here someday. Kids who might love swimming or just want to live somewhere nice without being treated like they are broken. That night, after the last of James's colleagues had left and Lily had gone to bed, I found him still at the dining room table, reviewing documents. "What are our chances?" I asked quietly. He looked up, the determination in his eyes softened by a smile. "Very good. They made every mistake possible. They targeted a minor. They caused documented damage. They have a pattern of behavior, and they did it all in front of witnesses." Patricia seemed unfazed, I noted. "People like Patricia Winters believe they are untouchable because they have never been touched," James replied. "That is about to change." As I headed to bed, I paused at Lily's room, finding her still awake, scrolling through her phone. "Everything okay?" I asked. She nodded. "I found an online support group for teen amputees. I have been telling them what happened." "What are they saying?" "That I should fight, that it matters, that maybe what happened to me could help other people." She looked up, her eyes clear and determined. "I think I want to speak at the next hearing, tell my side directly." Pride swelled in my chest. "If you are ready for that, we will support you completely." "I am ready," she said with quiet certainty. "They tried to make me feel ashamed of who I am. I want to show them I am not." As I kissed her goodnight, I realized that something transformative was happening, not just in our battle against the HOA, but in Lily herself. The incident. Tea that had been meant to diminish her was instead revealing her strength. The path ahead would not be easy, but we had truth, law, and most importantly, each other on our side. Our living room had transformed. Where family photos and decorative pillows once created a comfortable space, legal documents now covered every surface. Laptops hummed with activity, and a large whiteboard listed names, dates, and specific HOA violations. What had begun as our personal fight had evolved into something much larger, a systematic investigation into years of discriminatory practices hidden behind flowery language about community standards. James stood before a small gathering of our neighbors, his manner calm but passionate as he explained the legal framework of our case. Among the audience sat elderly residents who had been denied basic accessibility modifications, parents of children with various disabilities, and several individuals who simply believed in fairness. The Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act exist precisely to prevent this type of discrimination, James explained, pointing to relevant sections highlighted on handouts. The law is very clear. Housing communities cannot enforce rules that disproportionately impact people with disabilities, and they must provide reasonable accommodations. Mrs. Garcia, whose father used a wheelchair, raised her hand. "They told me a ramp would destroy property values. I believed them and gave up." "That is a common tactic," James nodded. "They rely on individuals feeling isolated and overwhelmed. But when we bring these cases together, a pattern emerges that is much harder to dismiss." Over the following weeks, our team compiled 37 separate incidents spanning 5 years, all documenting how the Oakwood Hills HOA had systematically made the community hostile to anyone who did not fit their narrow definition of desirable residence. The evidence ranged from denied accommodation requests to excessive fees for necessary modifications to subtle pressure tactics designed to force undesirable residents to move. The breakthrough came when Thomas Reeves, a former HOA board secretary who had resigned in protest 2 years earlier, provided access to archived email communications. Under the watchful eye of our legal team, these emails revealed the HOA leadership's true intentions in stark, unambiguous language. "We need to maintain certain standards for the community profile," Patricia had written in one particularly damning email. "While we cannot explicitly exclude undesirable elements, we can make compliance sufficiently burdensome that they choose to live elsewhere. Property values depend on aesthetic uniformity and resident quality." Another email specifically mentioned discouraging visible disabilities from common areas during prospective buyer tour. The language was careful, always couched in terms of property values and community standards, but the intent was unmistakable. As James and his colleagues built the legal case, Lily embarked on her own journey. What began as participation in an online support group evolved into speaking at local disability advocacy meetings. Her first speech, delivered to a small gathering at the community college, was hesitant but powerful. I used to think my prosthetic leg was the hardest thing I would have to deal with, she told the audience. But it turns out people's attitudes about it are much harder. My prosthetic never made me feel less worthy, only other people tried to do that. Video of her speech was shared widely among advocacy groups, bringing attention to our case and connecting us with other families who had experienced similar discrimination. Lily's voice, clear, authentic, and increasingly confident, put a human face on what might otherwise have been viewed as a technical legal matter. The HOA's response to our building case was predictable but still shocking in its brazenness. Violation notices began appearing on our door with increasing frequency. Our garbage cans were 2 inches too visible from the street. Our lawn was 1/4 inch above regulation height. The color of our mailbox flag was not within approved color palettes. They are trying to drown us in petty violations, I observed as James documented the 7th notice that week. Make us look like problem residents who are retaliating because we would not follow rules. James nodded, his expression grim but determined. It is a standard intimidation tactic. They want us to exhaust our energy on these minor battles. But the intimidation extended beyond bureaucratic harassment. Security cameras that monitored the neighborhood streets seemed to swivel toward our house whenever we came or went. Board members happened to walk by our home multiple times daily, clipboard in hand. Anonymous notes appeared in our mailbox suggesting that troublemakers should consider if this community is right for them. One evening I found Lily staring out her bedroom window at a car parked across the street. "That is the 3rd time Mr. Hartman has driven by tonight," she observed. "Do they think they are scaring us?" I put my arm around her shoulders. They are used to people backing down. They do not know what to do with people who stand up. She nodded thoughtfully. At advocacy group last week, we talked about how bullies count on silence. They think shame will keep people quiet. "Are you feeling okay about all this?" I asked. "It is a lot of pressure for someone your age." Lily turned to me, her expression surprisingly serene. "For the first time since the accident, I feel like what happened to me might have a purpose. Not that I am glad it happened, but if my story can help change things for other people," she shrugged, "that matters." The turning point in our case preparation came when Dr. Melissa Chen provided her expert analysis of the damage to Lily's prosthetic. Her detailed technical report, complete with microscopic imagery of the damaged components, conclusively proved that the damage resulted from improper handling rather than normal wear and tear. "The torsional stress pattern is consistent with forceful twisting," she explained, pointing to fracture lines in the specialized water-resistant housing. "This type of damage cannot occur through regular use or even accidental dropping. It required significant deliberate force applied in opposing directions." With this evidence in hand, our insurance company agreed to cover the replacement cost, but maintained their right to pursue compensation from the responsible parties, adding another powerful entity to those interested in holding the HOA accountable. During this period of building our case, we discovered we were not alone in our fight. 3 other homeowners associations in neighboring counties had faced similar lawsuits for disability discrimination in recent years. Each case had ended in substantial settlements and mandatory policy changes. James connected with the attorneys who had handled those cases, creating a network of experienced legal minds focused on our situation. "What these cases show," James explained during one of our strategy sessions, "is that HOAs often operate as if they exist outside normal civil rights laws. They believe their contractual rules supersede federal protections. The courts have consistently ruled otherwise." As our legal strategy solidified, Lily continued finding her voice as an advocate. What began as small local speaking engagements expanded to include an interview with the regional news station about disability rights in residential communities. She spoke with a poise that belied her age, explaining complex issues of accessibility and inclusion in terms anyone could understand. "Living with a disability does not mean I need special treatment," she told the interviewer, her gaze steady. "It just means I need equal access. When someone takes that away, Whether by breaking my prosthetic or creating rules that exclude me, they are not protecting community standards. They are breaking the law. The interview aired on a Tuesday evening. By Wednesday morning, our phone was ringing constantly with calls from other families facing similar discrimination, disability rights organizations offering support, and reporters seeking follow-up stories. What had begun as our personal fight had become a spotlight on a widespread but often hidden form of discrimination. Patricia Winters and the HOA board responded with a formal letter threatening legal action for defamation and misrepresentation of community policies. The letter, printed on expensive stationery with the HOA logo embossed in gold, demanded we cease all public discussion of the incident and retract our false claims about discrimination. James read the letter aloud to our growing team of supporters, his expression calm but his eyes sparking with determination. They still think they are dealing with an intimidated family trying to avoid conflict. They have no idea what is coming. The monthly HOA meeting fell on the last Thursday of July, exactly 3 weeks after the pool incident. Unlike previous meetings with their sparse attendance and quick proceedings, this one saw the community center filled to capacity. Residents who had never spoken up before came early to secure seats. Local news outlets positioned cameras at the back of the room. The energy crackled with anticipation. Patricia Winters called the meeting to order with her usual practiced authority, though I noticed a slight tremor in her hand as she arranged her papers. The board members flanked her as always, but their expressions were tense, eyes darting nervously around the crowded room. "Before we begin our regular agenda," Patricia announced, "I want to address the unfortunate rumors and mischaracterizations circulating about our community. Oakwood Hills has always prided itself on maintaining standards to benefit all residents. Recent allegations have painted our enforcement actions in a false light, and the board wishes to express its disappointment in those who would damage our community's reputation for personal gain." A murmur of discontent rippled through the audience. James sat calmly beside me, briefcase on his lap, waiting for the appropriate moment. Lily sat on his other side, her back straight, eyes fixed on Patricia. "Now moving to our first agenda item, landscaping proposals for the fall season," Patricia continued, clearly attempting to steer the meeting toward safer territory. James raised his hand. Protocol dictated that the board could not ignore a resident during the official meeting. Patricia acknowledged him with obvious reluctance. "Yes, Mr. Mitchell." James stood, opening his briefcase to remove a thick sheaf of documents. "Before we discuss landscaping, I believe there is more pressing business regarding compliance with federal law." He approached the board table, placing the documents before each member with deliberate precision. "This is formal notice of legal action being filed against the Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association and board members Patricia Winters, Richard Hartman, and Michael Delaney in both their official and individual capacities." The room fell silent as James continued, his voice carrying clearly to every corner. "This filing details violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and multiple state civil rights statutes. It documents 37 separate incidents of discrimination against residents with disabilities over a 5-year period, establishing a clear pattern of willful violation of federal protections." Richard Hartman reached for the documents with a shaking hand. "This is absurd. You cannot sue board members individually for performing their duties." "Actually," James replied calmly, "when those duties are performed in knowing violation of federal law, individual liability absolutely applies. The emails in Appendix C, which you authored, Mr. Hartman, demonstrate clear awareness that your actions violated accessibility requirements." Patricia attempted to regain control. "This meeting is not the appropriate forum for legal threats, Mr. Mitchell. If you have filed something, our attorneys will review it." "I agree this is not the appropriate forum," James nodded. "That is why we have also filed for an emergency injunction in federal court to immediately halt all discriminatory practices while the case proceeds. The hearing is scheduled for Monday morning." He turned to address the residents directly. For those of you who have experienced similar discrimination, there is still time to join the class action. My colleagues are available in the lobby to take statements." As if on cue, the community center doors opened, and 3 attorneys from James's firm entered, carrying clipboards and additional documentation. The choreography of the moment was not lost on anyone present, especially the board members, whose faces had drained of color. Outside, I could see the flashing lights of news vans through the windows. Our story had struck a chord far beyond our neighborhood, touching on issues of disability rights, housing discrimination, and the often unchecked power of homeowners associations. Patricia Winters stood abruptly. "This meeting is adjourned pending legal consultation." Actually, an elderly resident called from the back. "The bylaws state that a meeting in progress can only be adjourned by majority vote of attending members." He smiled thinly. "I believe we all have some things to discuss." What followed was unlike any HOA meeting in Oakwood Hills history. One by one, residents stood to share their experiences. The widow whose therapy animal had been banned despite medical documentation. The veteran whose application for a wheelchair-accessible mailbox had been repeatedly denied. The family whose child with sensory processing disorder had been fined for landscape modifications that simply involved different textured plants in their garden. Throughout it all, Lily sat beside me, occasionally squeezing my hand, her presence a reminder of why this fight mattered. This was not just about a damaged prosthetic or a single act of discrimination. It was about the community we wanted to live in, one where differences were accommodated rather than erased, where rules served people rather than oppressed them. The following Monday's court hearing was brief but decisive. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with 3 decades of civil rights experience, reviewed our evidence and granted the emergency injunction. All HOA enforcement actions against residents with disabilities were suspended pending full review of the case. Additionally, the board was prohibited from any retaliatory measures against residents who joined the lawsuit. The evidence presented suggests a substantial likelihood of success on the merits, the judge noted. The documented pattern of behavior indicates systematic discrimination rather than isolated incidents. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered as James made a brief statement. "Today's ruling is just the beginning. We intend to ensure that not only is justice served in this specific case, but that meaningful changes are implemented to prevent such discrimination in the future." A reporter called out, "Is it true that the HOA president has filed a countersuit for defamation?" James nodded. "Yes, and we welcome that filing as it only provides another forum to present the evidence we have gathered." And evidence we had in abundance. As news of our case spread, more residents came forward with their stories and documentation. Most powerful was the testimony of Thomas Reeves, the former board secretary who had provided the damning emails. His deposition described in detail the board's conscious strategy to make the community inhospitable to residents with visible disabilities or special needs. "It was never explicitly stated as discrimination," he testified. "It was always couched in terms of property values and aesthetic standards, but the intent was clear. Certain types of people were not welcome, and the rules would be used to enforce that unwritten policy." Patricia's defamation countersuit collapsed spectacularly when her own emails were entered into evidence. Emails in which she referred to residents with disabilities as community burdens, and suggested that accommodations would open the floodgates to undesirables. The courtroom fell silent as these words were read aloud. Even Patricia's own attorney seemed taken aback by the naked prejudice they revealed. The judge's expression remained neutral, but her pointed questions to the HOA's legal team made her position clear. This case represented a serious and systematic violation of civil rights law. Most powerful was Lily's testimony. She sat in the witness box, poised and articulate despite her youth, describing not just the incident at the pool, but the cumulative effect of being made to feel unwelcome in her own community. "When Mrs. Winters took my prosthetic, she did not just damage an expensive medical device," Lily explained. "She sent a message that people like me do not belong in places like Oakwood Hills, that we should hide away or leave entirely." She looked directly at Patricia. But this is my home too, and I have every right to swim in that pool, to walk those streets, to live my life without being treated as a problem to solve. The medical experts who followed provided technical testimony about the damage to Lily's prosthetic and the physical impact of using an ill-fitting replacement. Dr. Chen's detailed analysis left no doubt that the damage resulted from mishandling rather than normal wear. The force required to create these stress fractures, she testified, pointing to enlarged images projected on the courtroom screen, is consistent with twisting or wrenching motions. It could not have occurred through normal handling or even accidental dropping. Day by day, the HOA's defense crumbled. Their attempts to portray the incident as a misunderstanding, to frame their rules as neutral health and safety measures, to paint our family as troublemakers seeking attention, all fell apart under the weight of documentation, testimony, and their own damning words. By the third week of proceedings, settlement discussions began in earnest. The HOA's insurance company, facing the prospect of a multi-million-dollar judgment, pushed for resolution. The board members, now facing not only the class action but potential personal liability, were suddenly eager to find an acceptable compromise. As we left the courthouse after a particularly grueling day of testimony, a reporter approached Lily. "How does it feel to be at the center of a case that might change how HOAs operate across the country?" she asked. Lily considered the question carefully. "I never wanted to be at the center of any case," she replied. "I just wanted to swim in my neighborhood pool without being treated like I did not belong there. But if what happened to me helps make sure it does not happen to someone else," she smiled slightly, "then maybe it was worth it." The settlement, when it finally came, exceeded even our most optimistic expectations. The terms were comprehensive: substantial financial compensation for all affected families, immediate resignation of the board members involved in discriminatory practices, and most importantly, a complete overhaul of HOA policies with court-mandated monitoring for compliance over the next 5 years. Our family's specific settlement included full compensation for Lily's damaged prosthetic, funds for an upgraded model with advanced aquatic capabilities, and damages for emotional distress. But the real victory lay in the systemic changes that would affect every current and future. Resident of Oakwood Hills. The court-approved settlement mandated creation of an accessibility committee with actual authority, required disability rights training for all board members, and established a transparent process for accommodation requests. Most significantly, it allocated substantial funds to retrofit community spaces that had been designed without consideration for residents with mobility challenges. Construction began almost immediately. The community pool received a proper lift system and zero-entry access point. Sidewalks throughout the neighborhood were repaired to eliminate hazardous cracks and uneven surfaces. The clubhouse bathrooms were redesigned for accessibility, and the playground gained equipment that could be enjoyed by children of all abilities. The community meeting to elect new board members drew record attendance. Candidates spoke passionately about inclusion, accessibility, and the true meaning of community standards, not aesthetic uniformity, but mutual respect and support. When Mrs. Garcia nominated Lily for the newly created youth representative position, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Lily's speech was brief but powerful, focusing not on past grievances but future possibilities. "A community is only as strong as its commitment to all its members," she told the gathered residents. "Rules should protect people, not property values at the expense of people. I would be honored to help build the kind of neighborhood where everyone feels welcome and valued." The vote was unanimous. At 16, Lily became the youngest person ever to serve on the Oakwood Hills HOA board. Her first official action was to propose creation of a swimming program specifically designed for children and adults with physical disabilities, a program that would later be recognized as a model for inclusive recreation across the county. Patricia Winters moved away shortly after the settlement was finalized. I spotted her one morning supervising movers as they loaded her furniture into a large truck. Our eyes met briefly across the street. She looked away first, her expression unreadable. I felt no satisfaction in her departure, only a quiet hope that she might reflect on the damage her prejudice had caused and perhaps grow from the experience. 6 months after the settlement, on a warm spring afternoon, I stood at the edge of the community pool watching Lily glide through the water. Her new prosthetic, a state-of-the-art model specifically designed for transitioning between land and water activities, rested safely on a special bench installed as part of the accessibility upgrades. Children splashed nearby, some with visible disabilities, others without, all playing together without hesitation or awkwardness. Mr. Chen, whose son used a wheelchair, approached to stand beside me. "I almost moved last year," he confided. "After the third time they denied my request for a ramp modification, I had actually started looking at houses in another district." "I am glad you stayed," I replied. He nodded toward Lily, who was demonstrating swimming techniques to a young girl with a similar prosthetic. "So am I. She is quite something, your daughter." "She found her voice through all this," I agreed. "Sometimes I think that is what they were really trying to take from her, not just her mobility, but her sense that she had the right to speak up and be heard." "Well, they failed spectacularly at that," Mr. Chen laughed. Indeed they had. 1 year after the incident, Lily was invited to speak at the National Disability Rights Conference, sharing her experience as part of a panel on housing discrimination. Her clear, straightforward account of what had happened and the changes that resulted resonated with advocates and policymakers alike. "The most important thing I learned," she told the audience, "is that discrimination thrives in silence. When we speak up, not just for ourselves but for each other, that is when real change happens." The legal impact of our case extended far beyond our neighborhood. 3 state legislatures used it as the basis for strengthening HOA oversight and anti-discrimination protections. Law schools began including it in their civil rights curricula as an example of how seemingly neutral rules could be applied in discriminatory ways. Housing rights organizations used our documentation methods as a template for helping other families build similar cases. James found himself in demand as a speaker and consultant, helping other communities examine their HOA regulations for potentially discriminatory provisions. He always began these presentations with Lily's story, not focusing on the victimization, but on the transformation that followed. "Rules without compassion are not order, they are oppression," he would say. "And communities that value conformity over inclusion are not really communities at all." As for our family, we chose to stay in Oakwood Hills. Some friends questioned that decision, suggesting that the bitter memories might overshadow our experience there. But leaving would have felt like surrendering what we had fought so hard to establish, our right to belong, to be fully ourselves in our own home. The neighborhood changed around us in ways large and small. New families moved in, including several with members who had various disabilities. The community newsletter, once filled with violation notices and warnings, now highlighted accessibility improvements and inclusive events. The surveillance cameras that had once seemed to track rule breakers were redirected to focus on actual security concerns rather than resident monitoring. 2 years after the incident, on the anniversary of the settlement, the community held a celebration at the pool, not to commemorate the lawsuit, but to recognize how far we had come since then. Residents of all ages and abilities gathered for what the new board called a belonging barbecue. Tables were arranged to accommodate wheelchairs. Sign language interpreters ensured deaf residents could participate fully. Children played in the water under the watchful eyes of trained lifeguards who understood various mobility needs. I watched Lily moving confidently through the crowd, greeting neighbors by name, her prosthetic visible beneath her shorts without self-consciousness or apology. This was what victory looked like, not just winning a legal battle but transforming a culture. Later that evening, as we walked home together under a canopy of stars, Lily linked her arm through mine. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked, "if they had just let me swim that day?" "Sometimes," I admitted, "but then I look at everything that has changed, all the people who feel welcome here now who might not have before, and I think maybe this was the path we were meant to take all along." She nodded thoughtfully. "I used to think my accident was the worst thing that could ever happen to me, Then I thought what happened at the pool was. But now I see that the worst thing would have been staying silent, accepting that I should be invisible or go somewhere else. You never could have done that, I said with certainty, not the daughter I know. No, she agreed with a smile that illuminated more than just her face. Not the daughter you raised. We continued home in companionable silence, our footsteps synchronized despite her prosthetic, through streets that truly belonged to everyone now. The houses around us were still beautiful, the lawns still green, the trees still perfectly spaced. But Oakwood Hills had become something far more valuable than a picture-perfect neighborhood. It had become a genuine community, where standards were measured not by uniformity, but by how well we cared for one another, especially those who moved through the world differently. Sometimes justice arrives not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet transformation, a community pool where everyone can swim, a neighborhood where difference is not merely tolerated but valued, a place where belonging is not determined by conformity but by the simple, revolutionary act of being recognized as fully human. And sometimes, the most important victories are not those won in courtrooms, but in changed hearts and minds. The prosthetic that Patricia Winters damaged that summer day cost $25,000. The lesson she and the HOA board learned about the true meaning of community proved far more valuable, and it was one they never would have learned if they had bothered to find out that my husband was a civil rights attorney before they decided my daughter did not belong in their perfect neighborhood.